Welcome back to the Munn Avenue Muse, sponsored by the MunnAvenuePress.com. We are publishers and authors ourselves. Actually, I've written 6 books, and like almost all the people that work for us have written 1 or 2 or more books. So we live, eat, and breathe publishing, and we help authors produce their books, create covers, good interiors, edit, proofread, publish. And the part that a lot of publishers miss is we help market and sell the books. So we try and get your books out everywhere. And in the last year, we are producing podcasts just like this. So if you have any interest, let us know. But today, I'm just so delighted to share with you and have you meet Bob Katz, who was one of the first authors to work with us, a fantastic writer with deep experience. I'll tell you a little bit about Bob, and then we're going to learn more and have a conversation. But Bob is the author of several acclaimed books, including the novel Third and Long, which was the winner of the 2011 Independent Book Publishers Association Fiction Award. Elaine's Circle, which is probably my favorite, a nonfiction account of dramatic episode in a rural Alaska classroom. The Whistleblower, rooting for the ref in the high-stakes world of college basketball, about the stressful season in the career of an elite NCAA basketball referee. The novel Hot Air, about a mystical South American revolutionary on a speaking tour of U.S. college campuses. And Easy and the Intangibles, an inspirational sports novel for middle readers. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, Mother Jones, Newsweek, and many other publications, as well as online sites like Slate, Huffington Post, and Common Dreams. So, Bob, that's a lot. Welcome.
Well, welcome, Charlie. And I would add one more newly published novel called Waiting for Al Gore, which I know we're going to discuss. And that's the latest entry into my somewhat abbreviated list of book publications. But happy to be here and happy to be speaking with you, who've been so helpful to me in so many regards.
Oh, well, great. So, Bob, to start off, well, maybe you could tell us why you got into writing and a little bit about your journalism background.
I will banter forth. Feel free to either interrupt or divert me back in the right direction if I go astray. But, like almost like you, and I think many people you deal with, I've always been an avid reader. Somewhere early in my life, probably aspired to be a writer, as so many avid readers do. My first jobs and so-called profession out of college was as a journalist. So I used to be a working reporter, looking back, I think anybody who's been involved in the more mundane aspects of journalism, by that I mean school board committee meetings and obituaries and police reporting, sooner or later thinks, wouldn't it be interesting to try to either fictionalize what I am becoming aware of and what I'm observing, or at least extend it to longer forms than the few paragraphs that the newspaper is likely to print. So that's a long-winded way of saying I've been chewing on the prospect of being a writer for a long time, and in terms of book writing, at some point in time, I just said it's put up or shut up. I can, I remember hearing an anecdote in an interview with the great novelist E.L. Doctorow. Ragtime, his most famous book, but won the National Book Award once or two. In an interview with him that resonated with me, where he said, until the age of 20, whatever, I don't remember the exact number, so, but until the age of my early 20s, I was so sure that I was going to be a writer, I never felt the need to write anything. And I remember that might have been me, So at some point I decided to just, as I say, shut up and do it. Wrote a novel that I had great enthusiasm for, but it never coalesced in the way that would make it, quote, publishable, although that was a long time ago. And I think, had I known about Munn Avenue Press back then, it might have been, I might have had a different trajectory. But that's sort of my ancestry with this. I've written both fiction and nonfiction books, and have no preference. A good nonfiction story excites me every bit as much as the prospect of doing a fictionalized novel. In fact, good nonfiction story has some comfort to the writer that fiction does not. I mean, fiction, as you know, is the blank page and maybe a somewhat blank mind approaching it, whereas nonfiction, you've got notes and reality to help organize your process.
Is
I
there
could
a
keep going,
difference?
but cut me off. And
Yeah, no. Is there a difference in the? I mean, in terms of having some material to work with in nonfiction that you have to invent in fiction, is there a difference to you in the act of actually writing nonfiction versus fiction?
boy, it's a question I should have a clearer, and there has to be, and by what I mean, the answer is yes. But what that difference is, I think it's just a little easier to jumpstart into the challenge of a blank page when you're dealing with nonfiction than it is with fiction, I think. But as you know, Charlie, from the writing you've done and other writers you've talked to, if you've got a good outline in a fictional form and you know what you're doing, that challenge of jumping into the blank page is more manageable. So
Right.
being unprepared is a problem in either genre, and I've experienced that also.
Well, tell us what the inspiration was for your most recent book, your Al Gore book.
Waiting for Al Gore. The inspiration, the genesis of it, I'm both in some ways proud to say and also embarrassed to say, began a long, long time ago. I had written a novel, which you referred to in your introduction, called Hot Air, that decades ago, had a kind of second-tier publisher, didn't get a particular amount of attention, but did get optioned by a major movie company with a major actor. So the actor Michael Keaton, who was then hot, well, he's still hot stuff, but then was particularly hot stuff because he had just quit the follow-up production of Batman and was free to make another, movies. So he and his manager optioned my novel. They signed a deal with MGM. And for a series of years, I just thought, I'll just kind of put my feet up and wait for that phone to ring. Wheel of Fortune kind of exercise. During that time, I started thinking about if this novel gets made into a movie, and the punchline, I'm sorry to report, is that it didn't and won't. But if that were to happen, is there a follow-up novel I can imagine that might build on what was soon to be a major motion picture, and of course was never to have been? The novel Waiting for Al Gore, the genesis of it, the outline of it, the core premise of it began in my imaginings of what would be a sequel to that original novel. That was decades ago. I played with it a little. I wrote a little. I put it down, in a kind of dispirited way at various times. And then a couple years ago, either because I couldn't even exactly say why, but a couple years ago, I said, that was a good idea. The movie that it was going to build on is history. It did not happen. but let me go back to it anyways. And
Well, what is the idea? What's
the idea, so at the very end of Hot Air, I don't want to recreate the whole story of it. I mean, you gave a little outline. South America, it has a story to do with a talent agent who is leading a South American revolutionary on a college campus tour. And at the end of the novel, the South American revolutionary disappears and the talent agent has to take over and spectacularly kind of knocks it out of the park to everyone's surprise, including his own. The follow-up idea, which has morphed into my novel, Waiting for Al Gore, is for that talent agent to have become a kind of motivational speaker, a self-help guru. and the core story, or the core aspect of Waiting for Al Gore is a floundering environmental organization that is forced by circumstance, thinking that Al Gore himself, the great Al Gore, the great environmentalist, will appear at their event, learning that it might not happen and having to rely as a replacement on this figure who was originally in my, you get the drift.
Sounds like fun. Yeah.
It is a humorous novel. I'm proud of it. Humorous novels have their own niche, and it's a very, very small one. I'm starting to learn, but happy to have written it. And that's more or less how one led to the other, with plenty of detours.
Well, it's interesting because we've published and promoted a couple of humorous novels in the last year. One of them recently is called The Kid Grows in Brooklyn. It's very funny. It's very cute. It's very nostalgic. And the humor ones are doing really well. I mean, it's gotten a terrific reception.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So I'd be encouraged for you. And I'll mention it again, but just so everyone knows, all of Bob's books are available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and can be ordered from local bookstores. The two that we had I will call it the honor and privilege to publish for you were second editions of Third and Long, which is a delightful novel of fiction about a factory town in the Midwest that is struggling, but a stranger arrives on a train and everything changes. And did I summarize that?
Oh yeah,
That's a log line.
Yeah.
They in movies they say 25 words or less. Is the log line that's supposed to get people to want to make your movie. And then Elaine's Circle. I love both books. My wife said that Elaine's Circle was her favorite book of last year that she read. And she reads a lot. She's a voracious reader. And it's such a touching story. And it is nonfiction, and it is a real story. Tell us how you came on that story. And also, I found it very interesting to learn that you had gone to Alaska and you had met many of the people involved. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, and I'll just I'll launch into that, but I'll say it again. You've been invaluable, you and Munn Avenue Press, in reissuing that book, which had a commercial publisher first time around. It didn't do a bad job, but after the first 6 or 12 months, it's all history to a regular publisher, and I feel the book has gotten a second life and a more vibrant second life through your auspices. So I'm completely pleased about that. I used to do, in addition to being a writer, I've been in business. I used to own and run a speakers bureau, and I also had done a certain amount of freelance writing in other capacities. Among them, I had done some freelance writing for the National Teachers Union, called the National Education Association, known by few know that it's actually the largest union in the United States. as you can imagine, they represent public school teachers and associated workers throughout the education industry. So I'd done some writing for the president of the teachers union, did some speech writing, actually co-authored or ghost authored a book with him, learned about some teachers' stories, at some point got a book contract actually to write a kind of profiles of inspiring teachers, sort of a collection. And I had a nice contract with a commercial publisher. And I started doing some research and almost immediately bumped into a story that I thought was so dramatic and moving and compelling. I said, I don't want to do the book I'm about to do. I want to do the entire book on this one story. And the publisher said, no thanks. So that was the end of that publishing deal. And I did the book with another publisher, and did go out. So the essence of the story, which I'll summarize quickly, is that a school teacher in rural Alaska, a town called Eagle River, Alaska, maybe an hour from Anchorage. And it was told to me through these teacher union contacts, had a child who was in her fourth grade class diagnosed with terminal cancer and given something like 6 weeks to live. And I can almost crack up or, lose it talking about it because it was so heroic. And unlike what you can imagine would be tolerable in almost any school situation, she sent a note home to the parents of every other kid in the class saying, I'm going to talk about this, and we're going to keep this boy in the class as long as we can, and we're not going to pretend that nothing's going on. This will be part of our classroom and part of our classroom discussion. And her name was Elaine Moore, and she would gather the children every morning in a circle to talk about other things, but this included. And the title of the book is Elaine's Circle. And I sort of went out there on spec to meet her, had to talk her into it because she was a very unassuming, very shy, I wouldn't say shy, very, very unassuming, humble person, hated the idea of even talking about it as if she was bragging. But the other teachers that I communicated with said, just push past that. She's a hero. She needs to be, you need to learn about her story and learn it from her and tell it. And I was really honored to be able to do it.
Oh, and it's an amazing story about, like it got me too. Like the kids would go to Seamus's house to tutor him. His enthusiasm, his desire to finish out the year, even though he had a terminal condition, and the way the community rallies around him. It's quite fantastic.
And it's, even in talking about it and hearing you talk about it, I would like to emphasize, for listeners that it's basically an uplifting story. It is not a downer at all. Elaine's heroism is uplifting. The way the children and the community rallied around her and the ailing boy was completely uplifting. It is,
Right.
he didn't grow up to become president, so it doesn't have,
No, that.
but every other aspect I find to be inspiring.
And I think the subtitle is telling too. It's a teacher, a student, a classroom, and one unforgettable year. And he's in fourth grade. He's a fourth grader, so you get an idea of what the age is there. So what we did, Bob came to us with a book that was great. What we did with it, I'm very proud of the cover we created for that book. I think it's one of the best we've done because it has the picture of the child's face and the snow in the background and the school bus, which was a lot more than the original cover. And we redesigned the interior, and we also promoted the book and continue to do that to get it out there. And you have shared with me the continued feedback you get from readers and such, because it really is a fantastic book. So it was really a privilege to help in any way we could to get it out there. So Bob, would you read us a paragraph or two
I'd
from?
love to, Charlie. I would read many, but I'll just read one long one. And this is near the end of the introductory chapter, which is called Elaine's Voice. And I start the book. I'm rather proud of the decision to. So just a chapter about what her voice sounds like and what her voice means in terms of her involvement in a classroom of children. And the point being that she had a very soft voice and was warned at the beginning of her teaching career, they're going to run all over you because you don't sound bossy or commanding or authoritative. Anyways, this is the end of that particular chapter. For a woman of almost congenital modesty that had led her to conclude wrongly that most people lived far more dramatic lives and therefore had far more important things to say, this penchant for storytelling was a bit surprising. Elaine herself had not even known it was in her. She'd always been the perfect listener. She'd listened, rapt, to the flowing and convoluted tales told by her father and mother, and especially by her older sister, who could spin out irresistible stories. Norma, her sister, was the storyteller. Elaine certainly never thought of herself that way until she became a teacher. Then something clicked. As with all magical occurrences, it was probably a confluence of factors. The forgiving nature of children, the special license in having a captive audience, subtle developments in her own emerging sense of self, all these contributed to the transformation. But transformation was certainly the word for it. Seemingly overnight, Elaine went from being an undemonstrative woman with a nearly inaudible voice and a habitual urge to dodge attention into a mesmerizing showstopper who constantly left a roomful of fresh-faced youngsters pleading impatiently, "Please, please, Mrs. Moore, please, tell us more."
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It also demonstrates your impeccable writing style. I mean, and then you leave it with "tell us more," which makes me want to read the next chapter. So, and it's interesting too, and you probably see this in your writing. And I talk to writers about this all the time. And whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it doesn't matter. I mean, I write thrillers, so it's front of mind. But if you can't write in a way that makes the reader want to turn the page, it doesn't matter what you're writing, right? I had heard an interview not too long ago with R.L. Stine, who's famous for writing the Goosebumps books.
Sure.
And towards the end of the interview, the interviewer asks him, my last book I wrote was a children's book, and I was asked the same question, and the question was, well, is there a moral to your stories? I mean, what are you trying to do with writing children's books? And people think, oh, the children's books have to have a message, and his answer was, my only goal is to get them to turn the page. So um, so whether you're talking about like our one of our favorite authors, Catherine Ellison, if you're talking about Imelda Marcos, or you're talking about Elaine Moore, or your characters in Third and Long, you got to turn the page.
Yeah,
And
no, and
Bob, your books make me want to turn the page. I start a lot of books I don't finish for that reason, but I have finished all the books that I've read of yours.
and every writer, I believe, knows either quite consciously or certainly at the upper end of subconscious that that's the primary relationship to a reader. They can stop anytime they darn want to, and will, unless there's, unless it's like in a signed course in high school or something, you know.
Well, that's even more of a challenge these days because of short attention spans. I was recalling to our mutual friend Steve recently, and he hadn't really thought about this, but you know, I'm a big fan of old movies. I mean, all the way from the silence back. But if you take films in the 30s, the average length of a scene was about anywhere from 13 to 30 seconds. And when I watch movies these days, I do count, and it's 1 to 2 seconds between screen shifting.
And never a moment of silence, you know.
Right, right. And so when I see an older movie that takes its time, I appreciate it. But that's just sort of an example of people's attention spans and expectations these days. So I think there's two things that engage people to continue to turn the page. One is it a compelling story where I want to know what happens next? But also it's the writing style. Am I enjoying this experience? Is the ride a pleasure?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and almost in your writing, it's like I'm trusting you. I'll go wherever you take me because I'm having so much fun along the way. So I think that's sort of the dual challenge
Well,
for
you know, thank you,
authors.
Charlie. I appreciate it. I think we both sort of know without saying it. We are old school. We're forgetting chronological age. But
Well, I dyed my hair gray,
yeah,
yeah. But yeah, and old school is coming back. I'm surprised by the people I meet
books are the
recently.
vinyl records of.
Yeah, in their 20s and 30s who know who Miles Davis is and enjoy Chet Baker jazz and things like like really you know what that is? Yeah, so um, I think it's maybe it's in part a pushback against some of the technology and social media to step back and really enjoy a good novel.
Yeah, and kind of a antidote and corrective to the disturbing pace that these other medium kind of impose upon your consciousness. You know, the
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And there was a book written back in before the turn of the minute. It was a bestseller at the time called Megatrends. You may have remember it.
John Nesbitt, right? Was it?
Yeah. And the number one trend, which was very predictive, was um, high tech, high touch. Right. And so we
So
certainly
interesting.
got the
What a
high.
phenomena that book was too. It
Right.
was a phenomena throughout the business world, right?
Yeah. And it was Megatrends 2000. So it was before 2000.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the high tech, has clearly invaded our lives in a
Mhm.
sense. But the high touch is raising its head as well. So that's good stuff. Um, yeah. So, and Elaine Circle is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, as along with Bob's other books. So I was going to ask you, is there anything new in the works? What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about a lot. I'm procrastinating a lot, which is
That's part
a
of the job.
lifelong predicament.
Yeah, that's part of
Uh,
the job.
yeah, no, I don't have anything real. There are a couple of nonfiction, but maybe not book length projects that I'm kind of chewing on. Nothing. It's not like I'm uncomfortable talking about them. They're just so half baked. It would be
Right.
meaningless to talk about.
No, but
Um,
but in a way, your hesitation, it's interesting because I've known you long enough to see you go through these periods until something grabs you, right? And what is it about that? I think, to write 300 plus page book is a huge commitment by a writer, right? So it's got to be something that's going to sustain you through months and months of work and editing and rewriting and all the stuff that
Yep.
goes into producing a good book, right?
Exactly.
So, clearly, like Elaine Moore, as you told it, that story grabbed you, so you wanted to tell it.
Yeah, and you hit on exactly, more or less exactly what's on my mind, which is, am I enthused enough to sustain my energy, through a significant amount of work and a significant span of time that's going to have a lot of frustrations and by no means a surefire payoff. So do it, that. And you can talk yourself out of anything by applying those criteria. So at some point, I'll say, time to jump in the water and start swimming. But
Yeah.
I've got a couple projects like that.
Well, there was I'll share with you an interesting exercise that I heard from David Morrell, who's a fantastic author. And it seems like people don't know his name, but absolutely everybody knows his character, which is Rambo, right? Top five most recognized name of the 20th century is Rambo. But I've experimented with different forms of outlining to try and figure out what will improve my process. I mean, two of my books I just sat down and wrote. One, I wrote an extensive outline, but one of them, I tried David Morrell's approach, which was he writes himself a letter. He says, "Dear David, I have this idea for a book.
Hmm.
It takes place in such and such a place. And, here's the characters and here's what they're like and here's their struggles. This is what their desire is and here are the obstacles and so forth." And when he's done, he's got about a 25-page letter. So then when he's finished writing the letter, he looks at it and says, "Do I want to do this?
So have you done that?
Is this a good idea?" Yeah, I did that for my second novel. And so he decides, do I want to do it? And then if he decides he wants to do it, he's got a 25-page outline to start
Mhm.
with. So I did, I actually did do that with my second novel. And I was about 15 pages into the letter when I decided, yeah, I really want to do this, but I want to stop outlining and start writing. So, but I found that exercise
And,
interesting
and,
because
and, and
gives
do
you
you
a little
recommend
bit of,
it?
yeah, I do recommend it because I think it gives you a little distance. It gives you a way to get into something. So you could have an idea, for example, Bob, you've got these ideas floating around and you're not sure whether they're grabbers or not. So by writing this letter, you're giving yourself a little bit of distance. You're talking to yourself. And if you can write a compelling
Hmm.
15 to 25-page letter about this story that convinces you it's good enough to write it, well, then that's value right there. But, whether you decide to or not, because you might say, nah, it's not worth the time, but then you've only spent, a limited
Hmm.
amount of time on it. As opposed to writers I know that have written whole books and then stuck them in the drawer, because they got to the end. So at some point, the writer has to decide not only when they're going to commit to writing it, but when they're going to commit to like putting it out in the world, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to go off too much
No.
on that, but
Stuff that I think about for sure.
yeah, you and me both. So great. Well, Bob, it's so wonderful to have any excuse to talk to you, but great to share some of your wisdom and journey with the people that are listening today. Bob's Elaine Circle and Third and Long and Waiting for Al Gore and The Whistleblower and Easy and the Intangibles are all available on Amazon.com and other sellers everywhere. And If you enjoy this podcast or video cast, please like it, share it, subscribe on whatever channel you're on. The way to find it, if you're sharing with a friend, is if they like Apple or Spotify or YouTube, if they just search for Munn Avenue Muse, they'll find it. And if you are interested in talking about publishing a book, look for munnavenuepress.com, MUNN avenuepress.com. Bob, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Charlie. Thank you.